Well then, isn't this just the most delightful flying city? I sure do hope it's not secretly full of racists, or the setting of a slightly underwhelming first-person shooter. Well, fuck. Okay, let me explain what I mean. Games journalists had always told me that Bioshock Infinite was really good. And while nowadays I treat the opinions of games journalists the way I treat a bowl of lukewarm dog shit, back in 2013 these expectations managed to wiggle their way deep into my brain. In Bioshock Infinite, you play as Booker DeWitt, a dead-written alcoholic, on his adventures through the Alabama wet dream of Columbia, a flying city that looks like it was designed by Jim Jones himself. The game is a pretty standard first-person shooter, with a mixture of gunplay and special abilities known as vigors, which you get by drinking from these funny aftershave bottles. When I do that, I end up in the hospital, and let me tell you, you don't get a lot of sympathy from the doctors these days. While the gameplay is overall fairly solid, Bioshock Infinite becomes repetitive quite quickly, with any additions to the standard groups of enemies being at best a minor inconvenience, and at worst sucks the fun out of the encounter, like a Mormon in a nightclub. The vigors do add a nice extra option during gameplay, though I found I only ended up using one or two for most of the game. I did enjoy the use of the skyhook as both a melee option and way of moving between areas of the game by grinding on rails, something I don't think they really did enough with. But seriously, if I have to deal with one more of these George Washington fucks, I'm gonna go back in time, and I'm going to pry out each one of his fucking wooden teeth with a set of rusty pliers. So help me God. The gameplay is what lets this game down, since on the whole, it looks really nice. Columbia is absolutely beautiful, with a variety of interesting and unique environments, and in the moments where the gameplay slows down the game's presentation is really allowed to shine, and are probably the parts that I enjoyed the most. I can see why reviewers enjoyed this end release, since we were coming out of the era of shooters only being allowed to use 3 shades of brown. It does have its issues, in that enemies sometimes blend into the environment, like a Vietnamese soldier in the trees, but overall the art direction is pleasing, and is the high point of the game itself. The soundtrack is an appealing mix of classical music, and covers of more modern songs in a classical style, though I found the minstrel show cover of Black Skinhead a little strange. I found Bioshock Infinite's story to be a little bit too much for the game to carry. Despite starting off as a pretty standard rescue story, it becomes bogged down in way too many complicated narratives and side plots that don't seem to add a whole lot to the story itself. And while I know a lot of people are big fans of Elizabeth, I believe the story starts its descent the moment they start to reveal more about her. Overall, Bioshock Infinite was a little bit of a letdown for me. It's a perfectly reasonable shooter, but given the hype around it at the time I expected a little more. It tries a number of things, but is not successful in all of them. I'd still recommend having a look at it, since you might get more enjoyment from the story than my blackened heart is capable of. Anyway, I'll be off now. These nice gentlemen have invited me to their barbershop quartet, and they have assured me that only one of them might be a Klansman.